Good morning. How are we doing? All right. Hey, if you have a Bible, open it up to Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5. Well, I wrote my first hit single when I was in 6th grade. It was entitled Everybody Everywhere's a Skater. And we wrote it because at the time it was true. Everybody everywhere was a skater or thought they were a skater. And so I, too, like many of my companions around me, had the Jinko jeans with the massive pockets, had some Airwalks that I begged my mom for, and attempted to part my hair down the middle. But I have a widow's peak, and that didn't work out too well. Still bitter. And the problem, though, is this. I couldn't skate. So I had a skateboard, and I had the Airwalks, and I had the jeans, and I attempted to have the hair, and I tried to sit next to the kids at school who could skate, like actually skate, because everybody everywhere is a skater, and but I couldn't. And back then, the label that would have been placed on me is poser. You're a poser. You have the Airwalks, you own the skateboard, but you can't do anything on the skateboard. You are a poser. And I was, admittedly, a poser. Now, fortunately for me, a couple years later, sports became popular again, and I was all right. This idea of being a poser, it goes out further than just skating and in the late 90s. I mean, it's a term we could use for a lot of different areas or ways of life. And we're going to see a story today that cuts at the heart of it. We're in, as I said, Acts chapter 5. I've been around church a long time. I've never heard this text preached on live in person, mostly because it doesn't have a very good ending. Let me just give you the ending. They die violently, and it's bad. I mean, they get killed, and God's the one who kills them. And it's pretty rough. And we're going to see this story in Acts 5, and it's really a continuation of Acts 4. The chapter breaks in the scriptures here do us a disservice because they might make us think that it's a second thought, but it's not a second thought. It's the first thought. It's the same thought. It's one thought. We're in this series called Experience Redemption. We're actually concluding it today. And this series was an attempt to talk about what it looks like to experience redemption, ultimately God's redemption, but our church, Redemption City Church. And we've been asking the question, what do Christians do when they get together? So we talked about meaningful worship and biblical preaching. And over the last weeks, we've had a mini-series within this series. And we've talked about doing all that we do in the context of a family environment for the terms used most describing Christians amongst each other as brother and sisters. So we're a family if we're a church. So how do Christians operate in a family environment? So that's what this series has been about, and we're concluding it today. And really what this series is it's a launch into our second year as a church here in the movie theater. This story that we're picking up is really the conclusion of what's happened and what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. So let me give you a recap. Peter and John, who are two of the apostles, are walking into the temple, and a guy asks them for money. They don't have any money, and so they heal him. Then they are thrown into prison. Then they are released, and after they are released, they go to the rest of their friends who are really the early church, and they all pray together, and they ask for boldness in the midst of persecution, and the Holy Spirit shows up, and he shakes the room. That's what the scriptures say, and then the Holy Spirit empowers the believers, and then they all live in incredible community together, sharing generously with each other. They model what Christianity ought to be. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I used the word they 154 times in one sermon to prove a point and to model what the point that the author is attempting to make in the early book of Acts. Well, in this particular chapter, we're going to see a striking deviation from they. We're going to see what happens when they is replaced by me. We're going to see what happens when the community is replaced by the individual. We're going to see what happens when sacrifice is replaced with selfishness and the effect that it has on the church. Let's get back up to the conclusion of all of that they-ness. It was in verse 34 last week. It says this, There was not a needy person among them. This was the picture of the first church, the original church. For as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet. And it was distributed to each as any had need. There's a cadence. Somebody owned something, somebody sold something, somebody gave it to the apostles, and the apostles distributed it to the needy. Then they give an example. If you want to name your kid a biblical name, these first couple names are good ones. Thus Joseph, who is also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Just an example of a very generous man living out this mentality of the they. And so he has some property and he sells it. If you study a little bit more, you see that this happened in conjunction with the year of Jubilee. It's actually an important point because in Jewish culture, custom, and law, every 50 years would be the year of Jubilee and property would return to its original owner. Well, in this particular case, this individual sells it right then, which means the wealth wouldn't return to his family for 50 years. It was, in fact, the most generous of acts that you could make. And so this guy forsakes the wealth of this land that he has sold and he gives it over for the purpose of the they. And it's exemplified here in the scriptures. And it's not bad to lift up good examples of what people have done. We don't elevate them, but we can point to great acts. And the first word of chapter 5 is this, but. In other words, in striking contrast to what Joseph has just done, there is also another way to act. They introduce a new couple. This is the first married couple mentioned in the creation of the church. The first one. It says, but a man named Ananias. I would not name my child that if I were you. But a man named Ananias with his wife Sapphira. This is our first married couple. Sold a piece of property, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. Let's look at this from a natural perspective. You have Barnabas. He owns a piece of property. He sells a piece of property, and he lays the money at the apostles' feet. You have Ananias and Sapphira. They own a piece of property. They sell a piece of property, and they lay it at the apostles' feet. From a natural perspective, you could see no difference between Barnabas and Ananias and Sapphira. They both did exactly the same thing. And unless their realtor was running around telling people how much they had sold the land for, in a natural sense of things, nobody would know the difference. Which is exactly what Ananias and Sapphira wanted. They wanted to look exactly as committed, exactly as generous, exactly as all in as did or as was Barnabas. But they weren't. They weren't. In other words, they had the airwalks, they had the haircuts, they owned the skateboard, but they couldn't skate. They were posers. They'd had the same experience of God's grace. They've been empowered by the same Spirit. They lived in the same community. But there was something unsettled in their heart. Something they had not taken care of. Now, in these types of situations, because we're going to see the first conflict arise in the early church, in conflicting situations, there are only two options, really. Conflict will either produce community or chaos. Let me just say that again. Conflict will either produce community or chaos. An argument with somebody you love will either produce a greater sense of connection or a greater divide. Let's see what happens here in this story. The dishonesty, by the way, that we're going to get into is the issue. I want to eliminate anyone who's thinking, oh, so God wants every penny that I have to be satisfied. That's not the point of the story. With his wife's knowledge, they conspired together to do this. He kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. And there's apparently a problem with him not doing that. So what is the problem? It's either one of two things. Because what we're going to see next is that he lied to the Holy Spirit or he lied to God. Which means one of two things must have happened. Maybe you can relate to one of these. One of them is this. They told themselves, hey, we're going to go sell this. We're going to sell that piece of property that we have. We never developed it the way we wanted to, so let's just go ahead and sell it, and we'll donate all of the money. We'll probably get 100 for it, and then we're just going to donate all 100 of it because we don't need it. But then what happened? They sold it, and they got the 100 in their hand, and they looked at it, and they said, but I want it. I want half of it. We'll give some of it. I mean, have you done this? God, if you sell this car, we'll go ahead and give half of it away. God, if you give me that raise or bonus, we will become generous. God, as soon as I get out of debt, we are going to become the most generous people in the world. We don't just do this with money, by the way. God, as soon as I'm done with this season, I'll start to serve. As soon as I'm done with this season of time that I'm busy, I'll start to connect with people that I know I should connect with. We are so generous with money we have not yet gotten. We're so generous with time that we think is out in the future. What does God call it? Lying. God calls it lying. God says when you make a promise in your heart to me and then you don't keep it, it's lying. It's deception. You're posing. We do this in so many other ways. Well, why do you serve? Well, why do you do this? Why do you? No, I do it for this reason. I do. But you know you don't. You know there's a reason underneath the reason on why you really do it. It's posing. And let me tell you what God thinks of posing. He says, you have not lied to man, but to God. I'm skipping down a little bit. When Ananias heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last, and great fear came upon all who heard it. Later on, Sapphira walks in, and she dies too. They don't just die because they're shocked. They're killed. What God thinks of posing is death. Now, the fact that he doesn't kill all of us for doing it means he's really gracious and kind. But there's actually a record throughout the scriptures in the Old Testament where somebody will do something and God will strike the first offender down to death to show how he really feels about it. And then he's really kind and loving and gracious, so he doesn't do it to everybody else following. But that doesn't mean he thinks differently about it. It means when I pose and lie to God, when I pose and lie before my church, when I pose and lie, whatever, God's thought of that or what that should result in is death. Gratefully, he doesn't always do that. They wanted to look exactly like the people whose motives were pure, but theirs weren't. Now look what Peter says because it reveals so much. Actually, I'm going to jump back up. I want to point out one more thing. And with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for who? Himself. Himself. Everything so far up until this point for the church has been about they, the community, this thing, all of us. And then all of a sudden, what creeps in? Himself. Selfishness. Individualism. About me. It creeps in. Now, let's look at this verse. Verse 3. But Peter said. There's three things in this text, by the way, that I want to pull out because I think they'll be helpful for us as we operate in a family environment as a church. Three things this text teaches us. In verse 3, we see it all in here. We just got to unwrap it. But Peter said, here's what Peter says. Peter says, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? Why have you lied like this? Why have you deceived like this? Now, how does Peter know? And there's only one way Peter can know. And the text infers it. There's only one way he can know. The Holy Spirit has offered him discernment into this situation. Well, what does this teach us about the church? Well, it teaches us this, that the church has human leaders who are given discernment by the Holy Spirit as Jesus is the head of the church. This is the proper governance or structure of the first church and a church that wants to embody the biblical church. Jesus is the head. It teaches us this in John 15. Through his Holy Spirit, he gives discernment then. And there's individuals. Peter is by far, and everyone knows this, he is the leader of the church in this moment, along with the other apostles, right? And the Holy Spirit then offers discernment into Peter to what? To protect the church. What does this mean for us? It means this, that this church is not my church. It's not the eldest church. It's not the biggest givers church. It's not the biggest volunteers church. It's not the people who show up the most. It's God's. It's God's. And what will God do? Protect his church. Why? By putting Jesus at the top and having the Holy Spirit give discernment into situations through leaders. First thing this text teaches us. It teaches us something else very important, though. Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie? The church's opposition. The church's opposition. And the opposition is not evil. The opposition is not some force or some idea. The opposition is incarnate into something, a person, an individual, Satan. Satan stands in opposition to the church, this church. Satan, as an individual, if we can use that term, as an individual, stands in opposition to the church. And what does he want to do? He wants to destroy it. And how will he do it? The text teaches us. Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds? How does Satan attack his church? By deception rooted in selfishness. That's how he does it. You say, well, this is just one example. No, it's not. It is the example. It is an archetype. Well, let me go back to the beginning. What did God create before he created the church? He created the world. So God creates the world. What happens? There's a first married couple in the world. What are their names? Not Ananias and Sapphira, but Adam and Eve. And God created this, and God had humans who were going to lead it and all of this, just like he did with the church. And what happens? Satan creeps in. Satan creeps in, and what does Satan do? He gets Adam and Eve to conspire together, just like he got Ananias and Sapphira to conspire together, and he uses deception rooted in selfishness, and it leads to death. And so God creates all of the heavens and the earth. Satan creeps in, uses deception and selfishness. Death is the end result. Adam and Eve don't die physically, they die spiritually. Then God creates his church after Jesus has come and redeemed Adam's brokenness. God creates his church and he puts a married couple in there, Ananias and Sapphira. And what do? They conspire together. Satan comes in, contrives selfishness in their heart, uses deception, and it results in death. It's a pattern. It's a pattern that's present in the scriptures. It's a pattern that we could probably see present in the church if we're not careful. If we don't see what the text is teaching us. If we don't see what's there. Now listen, here's what we can't do. We can't just apply this corporately. We have to apply this individually as well. Let me keep reading. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to deceive or to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? And by the way, God's not concerned about whether or not all of the money is donated. He's concerned about the deception and selfishness that's inside. He proves his point. While it remains unsold, it was all yours. And after it was sold, all the money was yours. Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God. Here's the other thing we can't do with this text. We can't just blame Satan. Well, Satan made me do it. No, he didn't. Where was the contriving occurring? In his heart. In his heart, in Ananias' heart, in Sapphira's heart, the greed, the materialism, the deception, it was already in there. It was already in there. What does it mean for us? I believe it means that we have a tendency to pose. That we have a tendency to do this ourselves. That we have a tendency to want to look or appear a certain way, either to other people in our church, to God, or to ourselves. We even lie to ourselves. I'm doing the right things. I'm saying the right things. I'm participating in the right ways, or God is really my greatest love. And we say all of these things, and what we're covering is a heart that isn't actually that way. We're posing. We're posing. It also means this, that the solution to the issue, it's not some vague solution. It's not like, well, if we're all just knowledgeable enough, we can fix these issues in our heart. A lot of times in our culture, to be honest, we use the word sick to describe sin. You've seen this. We'll say, oh, they're sick. Fill in the blank because of X, Y, Z thing. They're sick. No, they're not. They're sinful. Like most of the time, addiction is not sickness, it's sin. Like, I'm just being honest with you. There is a disease in the heart, and it's called sin. The issue here is not a lack of knowledge for Ananias and Sapphira. It's not a lack of understanding. They don't need medicine. They're selfish. They need the gospel. You know what you and I need to overcome our posing? The gospel. We need Jesus. He is the only solution to our sin issue. Nothing else. Now, what does that require of us? Not living in deception with ourselves and with God. Let me give you an example. I have a friend, and we would always chat. He was pretty close at the time, and we would just talk through, and if we were in a guys group or whatever else, and we would chat through the different areas of life, and one of the areas we would chat about is finances, and he would always say this, well, I'm a tither. I'm a tither. And he kind of wore it like a badge of honor. I'm a tither. And we all know what tithing means. It means you take 10% of your income and you give it. A lot of times that means to the church. It could mean to really anything. But he wore this as a badge of honor. He'd say, I'm a tither. Then we get at the end of the year and he'd say, I tithe all to the church. And it would come up all the time on his premonition, not me asking out of him. We got to the end of the year and after hearing this all this time, and I was like, so you only make 17 grand a year? He goes, well, I said, no. How many times have I heard you say that? I said, I don't care how much money you give. I don't at all. But when you live and keep saying that to yourself, you are lying to yourself and you are lying to God. You are posing as something that you are not. And God, you know what he thinks about that? Death. That's what he thinks of it. I don't care how much money you give. Just stop lying to yourself. Because what we do is we allow that to build up this facade of who we are. And when we build up that fake image of who we are, then God can't do real transformation in our heart. When we believe the lies that we've told ourselves, then we're no longer susceptible to be transformed by the gospel because we think we don't need it. We've created this image of who we are. Ananias and Sapphira were supposed to be on this side of the cross. They were supposed to be the Adam and the Eve who were given influence in the early church. They were supposed to be a story that we would tell forever. Look at this married couple coming together and working for the purpose of ministry and not giving in to the attacks of Satan and breaking through it and living out the gospel together. And on the outside, had the Holy Spirit not given Peter the discernment, they would have looked exactly like that. We would have remembered him exactly like we remember Barnabas, and we would have said, what a couple. Because on the outside, they looked the same. Same experience of grace, same experience with the Holy Spirit. But they refused to deal with the sin issue that had root in their heart. And instead of dealing with it, they just posed. They just posed. And the result was death. Death. So here's my question for you today. Are you posing? I mean, are you posing before even God? Doing certain activity, operating in certain ways, saying certain things, but you know what's really ruling your heart. Are you posing before other people? You're posing before your church. I can tell you, it only leads to one place: death. That's the only place it leads. So there's no point. Can you imagine with me this story playing out differently? Can you imagine Ananias and Sapphira walking in, looking at Peter and saying, we sold it for 100 and we had said to God that we were going to give it all, and now we're looking at it and we just want to keep it. Like, I wonder what Peter would have said. He probably would have said, you should keep it because God doesn't want it anyway, if that's the way you feel about it. Why? Because God's not after their money. He's after a heart that is honest with him and honest with themselves. And here's what I want for you. And if we're going to operate as a family in this church, here's what I want for all of us. Hearts that are honest with ourselves and God. There's no point to our posing. There's no benefit to it. It only leads to death. But this side of the cross, we don't need it. I mean, Christ went to the cross, bearing all, opening all, taking on all, so that we wouldn't have to conceal what's inside of us anymore. I think a potential outcome of this talk would be for you to have one of the most honest conversations with God you've had in a really long time. And to get down to the deep motive of what's driving decisions and thoughts. And let him speak into it.